I think there's an actual purpose to our life, and there's something we're supposed to get and something we're supposed to give. And it's our challenge to figure out what that is and to really embrace it. That way it can give us some kind of direction. Because once you know what your purpose is, only then can you have a context for living your life. Because it comes from the purpose. And so the context, as we've talked about, kind of creates, it's like the umbrella for everything else. And once we have the context to how to live a purposeful life, then we have the clarity to know what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, because you can now define it. What would it look like day-to-day for me to be this person? And then once you have the clarity, you can then assess whether you're doing it or not. You can do a self-critique. But you know what? You can't do a self-assessment if you don't have the clarity of what that would look like. And you're not going to have the clarity if you don't have the context. And the context comes from the purpose. So it's kind of a chain reaction, but it all defines essentially who we are. And that's why I feel so important, that's really what we should be making sure we know the answer to. Do you notice how in the Midwest, particularly when there's a tornado, like what structures stereotypically are impacted the most?
Mobile homes.
Mobile homes. Why is that?
No foundation.
No foundation, there's no support, right? Well, and there's a neighborhood right next to the mobile home unit. They had damage too, but the foundation's in place. But the mobile home, in some cases, could be completely wiped out. I think people are the same way. I think leaders are the same way. I think some of us have a foundation and we're solid to the ground. Others of us don't, and we bounce around all the time. Whatever fire is taking place, whatever strong wind, whatever challenge in our life, we're bouncing around to try and address it, and we're just fighting and fighting and fighting to stay and survive. Imagine what you look like from the outside, though. Reactive. The external world defines who you are. There's no consistency. And when there's no consistency, there's no trust. People can't trust inconsistency. So you fall in one of two categories. Do you have the foundation, or are you more on the trailer park side where you're more reactive to what's happening? You know who knows the answer besides you? The people you impact. And I've actually invited them here this afternoon. So is that all right? It's just a few. And do you know where you stand with those people? Personally, professional relationships. Have you gotten feedback? Do you know how they see you? Are you the rock, or are you the more the throwing in the wind? So it comes down to, once you have that foundation and you know who you are and you know what you're about, then you can translate a management philosophy, then you can translate how to be with people, and what you see is what you get. It's much easier to say because you can define who you are in a sentence or two. And that becomes your foundation. So then, in the world of metaphors, when there's a strong wind or a fire or whatever else, you're going to sway, but the foundation's going to stay intact because you know who you are. And if you've lost the foundation, you can come back to it because you once had it. And that, to me, is what's the core of any relationship, of any leadership position, is knowing yourself well enough, that authentic self. So just to demonstrate that, I want you to stand for a second. And where you can have enough room to do this without knocking somebody over. All right? So if you're right-handed, you're going to go to your right. If you're left-handed, you go to your left, and basically point your finger forward. And then go as far as you can and mark the wall so you know what part of the wall it is. Okay, have you done that? All right? Now I'm just going to change two things, and then we're going to do it again. First off, I want you to breathe all the way down to your belly button, your navel. Full breaths, because here's what happens. In a typical day, we start taking shorter breaths, and we only breathe to about here. And as a result, we regurgitate the same air. We don't oxygenize our blood. We get tired, And that's why going on a walk feels better, when you're walking around, because you got the air in it. So what I want you to do is get in the same position, but now full breaths, okay? And the second thing I want you to do is have a slight bend in your knees. Almost like, you're kind of an extension of the floor. So you got the bend, you got the breathing, put your finger out, do it again. There you go. You can have a seat. What did you notice the second time? Yeah, so how do you explain that? Magic. I mean, really, from a physiological standpoint, what did we do differently? You relaxed. Yeah, you got centered. In the martial arts, people in martial arts are always mindful of these full breaths, so that their weight distribution's in the middle. It's not up here. And as a result, they're harder to knock over because they're more centered. They're connected to the ground. They're moving like this instead of their body moving. It's a much different feeling, and that's just what you did. Well, that's symbolic of what it's like to know yourself well enough to have that foundation that you could actually define it to somebody and hold yourself accountable to it. That's the same thing, because that gives you that centered connection piece. And it's easy to come back to center. It's difficult to come back to center if you don't know what center is, if you've never taken the time to define it. So that's why it is so critical.